Broughan.
Thanks, Cathaoirleach, and I'm sharing with Deputy Collins. And I'd like to re-echo the comments that have just been made by Deputy Boyd Barrett. I think nothing more true has been said about housing in this House in the last 7 or 8 years, and the fact that the decision was made to abandon large local authority development in the mid-early 90s was a very regressive, retrograde decision on spurious grounds of design and so on. Whereas, when we look at your city, Minister, and my city, you can see so many of those older local authority areas which are beautiful, incredibly sustainable estates, and we did that. Our local authority predecessors and governments did that in the past. It could be done again. So I'm delighted to have the opportunity to speak briefly on the Planning and Development Housing Residential Tenancies Bill. I fully agree, obviously, that major initiatives are urgently needed to vastly increase housing output in order to address our deepening housing and homelessness catastrophe. But I don't believe this bill really is one of them, Minister. In recent PQs, I asked you to resource the local authorities' ability to build directly, and the fact that a whole squad, a whole departments of skilled planning and construction professionals were totally depleted, if not wiped out, in the local authorities over the past 20 years. Yet you've done almost nothing on this, and the bill here is, I believe, a further continuation of the old failed rip-off private developer-led system. I do recognise, Minister, that you're sincerely aware of the depths of the crisis and that urgent dramatic action is needed. I've called so many times, I think, for a FEMPI-type response, and FEMPI is very direct action. As we saw on the financial side, this House was prepared to take ruthless action in relation to the banks and public sector pay and so on, but you don't seem to have the same inclination remotely in relation to housing. I do believe, obviously, the planning process at different stages could be expedited, but I think it's absolutely unnecessary to eviscerate local authorities' powers, as is planned in this bill before us. After all, Minister, if you think of the years from 2004 to 2008, up to 100,000 housing units were being built per annum. It was 68,819 houses last can in 2004, 76,954 in 2005, 80,954 homes in 2006, 93,419, sorry, that was in 2006, I think, 93,419 in 07, was it, and 78,027 in 2008. I think even the following year there was 51,724 houses were built. So that was done in the system that we have at the moment, Minister. We were able to turn out those massive amounts of houses, and under the existing Planning and Development Act 2000, vast new urban districts were built. For example, in my own constituency of Dublin Bay North, large developments were built, and it wasn't even a strategic development zone. At present, there are existing permissions, I think, to build 27,000 homes in Dublin alone, Minister, more than a year of the output that you have aimed for, basic output you've aimed for. And across Ireland, I think there's land zoned as residential for 414,000 homes. So the question is, Minister, why aren't these homes being built? That's the fundamental point. 17,434 hectares of land is zoned residential across the country, and 2,654 of this, over 5,000 acres, is around the Dublin area, which could provide 116,700 urgently needed homes. I believe the total reliance on the failed speculative developer and banking system is the problem, Minister, but this legislation does nothing to address that. We know, for example, that land hoarding is still a huge problem. I mean, you can look at some estates that are being built at this very moment, Minister, and it's like people sort of building a cathedral in the Middle Ages or the Great Wall of China. It seems to be going on, and you just wonder, why is that the case? Is it lack of finance, or is it developers deliberately holding and hoarding, knowing that the housing crisis will be even worse next year and the year after, and that their prices will continue to escalate? Lots of planning commissions, of course, Minister, have already been given in the two counties I represent, Dublin City and Fingal, in the last 2 or 3 years, but we're still waiting for the homes. Bankrupt developers, of course, are working their way back with the help of NAMA. The developers who left us with total messes, such as Priory Hall and Longboat Quay, with pyrite-ridden homes and fire traps, are now being called upon by your government to come to the rescue again in addressing our housing crisis that's spiralling out of control. Of course, the dysfunctional banks and developer financial model driving our housing market has been overseen by, at times, the equally dysfunctional central bank. I'm referring to the macroprudential rules minister. I complained, as did other deputies, I think, month after month, on behalf of constituents on the past year and a half for action on the rules, and only last week has Governor Lane seen fit to come forward with a few minor positive moves to try to relax them. I do accept, Cian, that on the positive side, the bill does provide for a few small improvements for tenants, but unfortunately it doesn't really make an effort to address the real power of landlords and property owners. Section 4, of course, provides for the streamlined planning processes for strategic housing and developments, which are defined as developments with more than 100 homes or student accommodation with 200 or more bed spaces. This streamlining, of course, is due to expire in the Minister in October 2019. You said, of course, as a result of the Senate amendment that it could go on to December 21. But again, why would you place time limits on this if the changes were deemed to be necessary in the first place? I think, Minister, you might have even looked at the opposite approach. You could have left the key invigilation and decision process with the local authorities who know their own areas best and greatly reduced the times of the appeal process. And while major developments are being proposed, surely it is our local planners and elected representatives through their third-party submissions and, of course, the whole range of civil society groups, resident associations, etc., who can best assess and decide on what's best for those areas. For example, in my own constituency, among many developments, I would need only reference a recent large housing development proposal at St Anne's Park, St Paul's School, where the residents of the receiving environment and our DCC planners are surely very best placed to decide on what is a sustainable development for that area. And again, the constituency knows it's an area with 6,500 on the homeless and housing list. We know that urgent action is necessary. Effectively, I suppose third-party submissions are now being banned for large developments at local level. You did say, I think, in your speech in the Senate and here that obviously a process has been created whereby now the Chief Executive of the local authority will have an input, will be able to make a submission. But it still is very different, I think, from the current situation where people can immediately, interested citizens can make a submission. I remember, in fact, mentioning the huge numbers of homes constructed in the noughties, but at that time, you might remember, Minister, we used to have, I think it was 8 weeks to make a submission at the first stage in the local authority, and it was cut back to 5, which is fairly, there was an attempt even then to try and streamline it. But I mean, I think if you look at the current, my own experience, very often developers, because so much information is missing from original proposals, and you have to have all these additional informations being required and sought. And usually, it's usually the developer's fault. And over the past 2 or 3 years, of course, there have been many time-wasting reapplications by developers seeking fairly minor amendments or seeking to increase the number of houses compared to apartments to take advantage of current market conditions. I do note that you have moved on that problem to some extent. But even when you look at the moment, as I said, after the process, a 5-week process, and the decision by a council, people have barely 5 weeks, 4 weeks rather, to make an appeal application in Bord Pleanála, and usually then the board's target is 18 weeks, I think, to decide. And even the biggest proposals, in my experience, in our constituency anyway, and neighbouring constituencies, they rarely get an oral hearing. And the only instances where we've had oral hearings are very large developments, perhaps 500 homes plus, or shopping centres, and that type of development.
Deputy, could I interrupt you and request you to move the adjournment of the debate?